This is the second lecture in a series of various funny stories, anecdotes, aphorisms from the Talmud. And instead of doing one long lecture with dozens of stories, I'm going to make a few smaller ones because first of all, the attention span of most people is not that long, and secondly, once the files that I produce for each lecture get bigger than 4 gigabytes, it's very hard to handle those files. So it's much easier to make lectures that are each a few minutes. So here's a few more funny stories in my mind from the Talmud. As I mentioned in the previous lesson, there are many, I think, jokes in the Talmud, or at least stories that have an element of humor in them. But again, this depends on, humor is something where you can't prove it's something funny. To me, it seems like there is an element of humor. You might agree or disagree, but even if you think it's not funny, but the purpose of these stories is, of course, primarily not in order to make jokes. There's a lot you could learn from these. And here's an example of one that I think you could learn quite a bit from, besides the funny element in it. It's a story from the Talmud Masechet Baba Metzia, 30th daf, 30th page. So once the son of Rabbi Yossi named Rabbi Ishmael, there is at least 2 people who are named Rabbi Ishmael in the Talmud, mentioned quite often in the times of Mishnah. You might be surprised, right? Ishmael, it sounds like more like an Arab name than a Jewish name. Actually, since Ishmael, according to Chazal, what's called did Shuvah, repented, therefore it became a name that's positive Jewish name. There were rabbis throughout history that are named Ishmael, as opposed to Esav, let's say, according to Jewish tradition. There's nobody named Esav, no Rabbi Esav anywhere, but Rabbi Ishmael is a very, not very common, but common enough name. So this particular Rabbi Ishmael was the son of Rabbi Yossi. That would make him at the time of Rabbi Huda Nasi, around the time when the Mishnah was composed. So it's like the end of the period of Tanaim. If you know, there was 2 main periods when the oral law was primarily either written down or fully codified, if you could say, because a lot of people, commentators think that Mishnah was not written down in the time of Rabbi Huda Nasi, but it was composed, meaning that the traditions, oral traditions that existed in various schools by various rabbis, it was all composed in a nice and short form in Mishnah. And the rabbi is credited, Rabbi Huda Nasi, for composing this final form of the Mishnah. Whether it was written down in his generation or not is a subject of dispute. So Rabbi Ishmael ben Rabbi Yossi would be in the same generation as Rabbi. He was one of the friends of Rabbi. By the way, there are stories in the Talmud about the conversations between the two. They respected each other a lot, by the way. They each one considered the other a great sage. At any rate, so this Rabbi Ishmael ben Rabbi Yossi was once walking on the road, and he sees a man with lots of pieces of wood that he's carrying. So that man, it's hard to carry so much wood, so he put it down, he rested a little, and now he asked Rabbi Shmuel to help him lift it back up. Rabbi, come here, help me lift this back up on my back. And Rabbi Shmuel is thinking, he's not, I guess, that young, or it's not that easy for him to bend and help him. And on the other hand, he has enough money. So he says, how much does this whole thing cost, right? This is just wood. Well, it says it's half a dinar. Just to give you an estimate of what it would be, the buying power, the amount of time you have to work to get this much money. They used to make something like 3 to 4 dinarim a day. So this would make it a 1/6 to 1/8 of a day's salary. So we're talking about, let's say, $20. It says it's $20, this wood. So Rabbi Shmuel gives him $20, gives him half a dinar, and says, here is your half zuz, and I'm making this wood hefker, nobody's. So what do you think happened? This guy then tries to possess this wood again, says that it's mine, right? If it's hefker, anybody can take it. And again says to Rabbi Shmuel, what a chutzpah, right? What an audacity. He says to Rabbi Shmuel, help me lift it, right? It's enough already. Rabbi Shmuel just gave him $20 for nothing. But if you're gonna take the wood a second time, at least don't ask him to help. He's asking him again, help me, Rabbi, help me lift this wood. So Rabbi Shmuel, in his humbleness, does the same thing again. He again gives him $20 and says, the wood is hefker. But then he sees this guy has enough chutzpah to do it a third time. He's already trying to take it a third time, this wood, to possess it. So then Rabbi Shmuel says, this wood is hefker for everybody except you. I'm making it nobody's except you cannot possess it. Now, the Talmud, of course, discusses that really Rabbi Shmuel didn't have to do any of that. He was just doing what's called lifnim mishurat hadin, more than the law requires. But it's a very interesting story in my mind. Here's another interesting story. Once there was 3 people who came from a distant land. 2 men and 1 woman. And the first man says, and they also had a package of some kind of property, some kind of a suitcase, I guess, with stuff. So the first man says, this is my wife, this is my slave, and this is my package, right? My stuff. And the second man says, no, this is my wife, this is my slave, and this is my stuff. Guess what the woman says? The woman says, the stuff is mine, and these 2 people are both my slaves. I think it's just hilarious. Now, of course, the story was not made as a joke. It's actually discussing what the solution is and under which circumstances. By the way, the Braita concludes that basically, since we don't know who is right and we don't have any witnesses or anything like that, so basically each one will give her a get. Each one will divorce with this woman because maybe he is her husband, and she collects her ketubah, the money that is owed to her after she gets divorced, from that package, right? Meaning now she could collect at least the amount of ketubah from the package in any case. If it's her package, then it's her package, and if it's not her package, then whoever gave her the get, who is the correct husband of hers, would have to give from his package the amount that's worth her ketubah. So it's kind of a Solomon's decision, similar to the story in Tanakh about Solomon, right? And of course, the Talmud, the Gemara qualifies this, that there's only specific conditions when this applies, as always, but the idea, I think, the story itself is in my mind pretty funny. So we'll mention one more story in the end. Rabbi Yeshua was walking on this path through somebody's field. You know how in old times, right, a lot of times didn't have roads, but people would walk through some specific area, and once enough people walk, it becomes like a path. You could see that this is where people will walk. So he walks, and he sees a little girl. And the girl says to him, by the way, this is one of the 3 stories Rabbi Yeshua said that when children or other people basically put him to shame and found him wrong, that he admits that he was basically lost the argument against other people, including children. So this is one of the 3 such stories. So this girl approaches him and says, Rabbi, don't you see this is somebody's field? This is a private property you're trespassing. And Rabbi Yeshua says, well, I'm walking on the path which was made by other people. This is already a public path. And she says, well, robbers like you made this path, right? Who do you think was first to walk here? And then the second and third and last, this path appeared. Robbers like you made this path. This is in Gemara Eruvin, 53rd page. And on this we'll end this short lesson, and we'll continue with Bezrat Hashem with more of such lessons in the future.